My name is Edward Ionel, and I'm here today to talk through how to achieve full situational awareness with multiple Kubernetes clusters. It's going to be an exciting topic. We'll start off by doing a presentation, and then we'll jump into a live demo, and we'll go from there. I am here today with my co-host, Grace, who is behind the scenes, and she will be able to help you with anything you need regarding this webinar and any questions you may have. She may be able to answer them as well. But once again, thank you all for joining. I look forward to this presentation and the live demo. And let's jump straight into it. Today, we're going to be discussing how to achieve full situational awareness with multiple Kubernetes clusters. As mentioned, my name is Edward Ionel, and I've been with Mirantis for the last 5 years. And I've been a part of Team Lens over the last 3.5 years. I've had the opportunity to watch Lens grow from a small open source project into a large platform that's used by over 1 million people nowadays. And it's been quite a journey. So I want to set the stage of why it is so important for organizations to adopt Kubernetes and work with Kubernetes on a day-to-day business. And it's quite simple. Majority of organizations believe that in order for them to hit their business outcomes and their objectives, they need to be able to develop and release quality software quickly. And Kubernetes plays a role there. Unfortunately, developers are tasked with much more than just writing proprietary software and code. They have to work with Kubernetes. They have to learn Kubernetes. They need to troubleshoot applications on top of Kubernetes. And many of them may not have the skill set they need to work with Kubernetes comfortably. So this brings us to Lens. Lens is a desktop application built to allow you to manage and monitor multiple Kubernetes clusters regardless of the distro, allowing anyone to easily onboard and operate applications in Kubernetes, hopefully increasing time to market, maximizing the productivity, and going back to achieving the business outcomes and increasing their return on investment. So this is one of my favorite slides, and this is what I like to think of as life without Lens. And life without Lens for developers, but even DevOps folks and operators, cluster administrators, is quite complex. For developers, they have to context switch constantly from their CLI to a text editor to documentation to a Kubernetes dashboard to a browser, a cloud console, and all of the above. Doing this significantly increases complexity and makes us not work in the most efficient environment because you're constantly context switching. Lens eliminates these challenges. Lens is going to allow you to have full situational awareness of everything happening in your cluster. It's going to allow you to manage and monitor multiple Kubernetes clusters. You can easily troubleshoot applications and deployments on top of Kubernetes by viewing logs, monitoring resources, understanding meta descriptions. And you can reduce the risk of error because you're not going to always be working directly with kubectl or kubectl. And we'll talk a little bit about how you do that in just a moment. But Lens really is a graphical user interface. It's a desktop application, a graphical user interface that allows you to understand every single part of Kubernetes and your deployments within. So what's the value of Lens to developers outside of everything I just mentioned and to operators and cluster administrators? So one, you're eliminating the amount of tools that you need to work with on a day-to-day basis. We surveyed 1 million users, and all of these stats here are given to us by our survey results, where our users believe they're minimizing the amount of tools they have to work with on a day-to-day basis. On average, we're consolidating 4 tools into one, and that one tool is Lens. We're also accelerating time to value. Developers that are not familiar with Kubernetes, or anyone that's not familiar with Kubernetes, has the opportunity to learn and adopt Kubernetes faster through the graphical user interface. And through these 2 initiatives, it's actually going to increase productivity significantly. Based on the survey results, we have come to the conclusion that on average, our users are saving 20% a week. So 20% out of 5 working days, they're working for 1 less day, you could say. And the reason for this is they're not constantly context switching. They're not constantly writing kubectl. They're not trying to learn constantly. Instead, Lens provides that graphical user interface for them to really extract the complexity out of Kubernetes and cloud native technologies. I love to throw this slide up to give everybody somewhat of an understanding of where Lens is today. So we have over 1 million users. We have close to 22,000 GitHub stargazers. And just in the last 30 days, we've had over 200,000 clusters added to Lens. You may be asking yourself, where does Lens fit in the development lifecycle for developers? And for developers, it's quite different than operators or DevOps engineers or cluster administrators. Lens plays a role at the end of their development lifecycle. So traditionally, developer is going to have to work with an IDE, source code. Then they'll move over to terminals and tools like Docker, Git, and so forth. And of course, they're going to have to push their applications and the software that they build on top of Kubernetes. And generally, they're going to be working with some DevOps engineers throughout this process. After that has been accomplished, from writing the code to leveraging Docker to pushing your application through a CI/CD and the application landing on top of Kubernetes, this is where Lens comes in. Lens is going to allow developers the opportunity to understand how their deployments are performing on top of Kubernetes, giving them that observability. It's going to allow them to test how the deployment's performing on top of Kubernetes. And of course, they're going to be able to debug and troubleshoot by accessing logs without the need of writing any kubectl. And as mentioned earlier, Lens works with any cncf certified Kubernetes distro, whether it's Mirantis Kubernetes Engine, K0s, GKE, EKS, and AKS, and a whole plethora of others. As long as it's a certified cncf project, it works. But for the operators or DevOps engineers, Lens usually comes in at the beginning of their day-to-day work. They're going to get on the laptops, they're going to access Lens immediately, and they're going to want to see a couple things. One, they want to see the health and the status of their cluster and all of the objects within. They're going to monitor real-time events to give them a clear understanding of what is happening within the cluster. They're going to take a look at lifecycle management of their deployments and their objects, and they may troubleshoot particular issues. So we can see the difference between where Lens fits for a developer's day-to-day lifecycle and an operator's day-to-day lifecycle. Now, of course, these things may vary depending on your role and the company you work for, but this is a pretty good general understanding of where Lens fits in for these different people. So from here, we're going to take a look at some features. These slides there's only a couple of slides here going into features. Instead, I want to use majority of the time we have together to do a live demo and to go through these features in detail with one another. As y'all know, the name of this webinar, or what we're going to be taking a look at, is Achieving Full Situational Awareness for Multiple Kubernetes Clusters. So one of the best features within Lens is the ability to work with any certified Kubernetes distro while switching between each Kubernetes cluster, regardless of where it sits, whether it's a Mirantis Kubernetes Engine cluster, whether it's local, whether it's air-gapped, whether it's running in the public cloud. Lens allows you to switch between clusters while always maintaining the correct context of that cluster itself. You can simply add clusters by just importing your kubeconfig file. And Lens is always respecting your role-based access control from your kubeconfig file. So if you have a kubeconfig file and you don't have the correct role-based access control, you're not going to be able to do anything with that cluster within Lens. We're always respecting the role-based access control from the kubeconfig file to ensure everybody's working in the correct context and no funny business is happening. But in essence, it's a single unified view for all Kubernetes clusters that allows you to manage and monitor and switch between any and every cluster. We touched on this already, but we're respecting your role-based access control via your kubeconfig file. So we're always authenticating the users to Kubernetes with the kubeconfig file. So again, I don't want to reiterate this too much, but I think it's extremely important. If you do not have admin privileges to that cluster, you cannot perform admin functions. If you don't have access to specific namespaces, you will not be able to view all the objects and deployments within those namespaces. So we're always respecting your role-based access control from the kubeconfig file that you're uploading into Lens. Lens also has a smart terminal built in, which is automatically going to match to the correct kubectl version of that Kubernetes cluster. And this goes back to being able to manage and monitor multiple clusters. So if one cluster is on a particular kubectl version, Lens is automatically going to detect that and ensure you're working in the correct context. And lastly, Lens has pre-built in Prometheus, allowing you to visualize your entire cluster from your CPU, your memory, your disk, capacity, total usage, amount of nodes, all the above when it comes to being able to monitor and visualize all aspects of your cluster. I do want to share that you can bring in your own Prometheus. You do not have to leverage Lens's Prometheus, but the majority of our users are leveraging the Prometheus that is built in the desktop application. So before jumping into the demo, I do want to share with everybody where they can go and find Lens. So just navigate to our GitHub repo, github.com/lensapps, or lens app, excuse me. And you can go from there, or you can download it directly from our website, k8slens.dev. I do want to share that Lens is built based off an open source project called OpenLens, which Mirantis is pretty much the sole contributor to that project, and we've actually developed and birthed that project. But the desktop application itself is not open source. If you'd like to use the open source version, we provide the source code, and you can build a binary and do it yourself. And now for probably the most interesting part of this presentation, which is the demo. So we're going to navigate to Lens now. I'm going to exit out of this presentation, and we're going to take a look at Lens. Okay. I'm hoping y'all can see Lens as of right now. We are in a home page, which is our What's New section. This is an area where anyone can actually get a better understanding of some of the features that we have within Lens, what's new, what's going on, any announcements we have to our user base, and so forth. But I want to take a look at my clusters. That is why we are here. So I'm going to open up this cluster, and you can immediately see how my cluster is performing. But before this, I think it's important to show y'all how you actually add a cluster to Lens. So within the home screen, you click Browse your local catalog. Your catalog consists of various different things, from general things to clusters to web links, allowing you to actually click into one of these things and go and access that documentation or go to our Twitter or anything. But I want to make this clear that you can add anything here. If you want to add a URL to maybe your EKS instance, your Google Cloud platform, whatever it may be, you can add these links here. And if you click clusters, this is where you can add a Kubernetes clusters. There's a couple ways you can add a Kubernetes cluster to Lens. You will always need the kubeconfig file as mentioned, but Lens can automatically detect and sync kubeconfig files on your local machine. Or you can copy and paste it by clicking this. You can copy and paste the kubeconfig file here, or you can open up and sync your kubeconfig files and find them. And I do believe I probably have some clusters here. If I search config, I have some config YAML files here that we can leverage and import right now to actually take a look. But I'm not going to do so right now because I do have some clusters added. I have a K0s cluster running locally. And from here, this is where you actually get the first glance of how your cluster is performing over the last hour. From my master to my worker node, from the CPU to the memory, and of course, the amount of pods and the overall capacity of this cluster. This section here where it says no issues found is going to be those real-time events that I mentioned to you. When something happens within your cluster, you're going to see real-time events directly in this section describing whatever the event may be. Maybe a pod was deployed, maybe something was terminated, and so forth. On the left-hand side, you can see all of these different Kubernetes objects. We'll jump into the workloads in a minute, but first, I want to take a look at our nodes. We only have one node currently running. We can see the CPU of the node, the memory, the disk, the version, and the age of the node itself. So I prepared this yesterday. Clicking into the node, I immediately get even more details about the node itself from, again, the CPU, the memory, the disk, the pods. I can shell into the node. I can cordon, I can drain, I can edit, immediately bringing up some YAML, right? So what's neat about this is you can perform all of these functions via the graphical user interface with no kubectl experience, no YAML experience, or if you like working within the CLI itself, you have the opportunity to do so via Lens as well. And we mentioned this, right? It's the smart terminal. From here, I could see when the node was created, the labels that are associated, the annotations, the address, the operating system, the image, the kernel version. I mean, anything and everything that you would need to be able to understand and see, you can directly in Lens without writing any kubectl. From here, I'm going to navigate to my workloads. And this, again, is a place where you can easily understand all of the objects, your pods, your deployments, your daemon sets, your stateful sets, your replica sets, and how they're performing at the very given moment. So everything's green, that's good. Everything's running. And I can click into my pods and again, get that same view I did with the nodes. Click into my Prometheus. I'm going to be able to see CPU, memory, network. The metrics are not available at this moment. I'm sure they'll come up in a moment. But you can see the name, the labels, what it's controlled by, the status. I can view the logs, right? And this is what we were talking about earlier, the ability to troubleshoot. I can download these logs if I choose to do so. All the visible logs, all logs. I can show timestamps. I can show previous terminated containers. So anything and everything you would like to see from a troubleshooting aspect, you have the opportunity to do so, again, without writing any kubectl. From here, I can navigate to another pod. I can scan the pod for images. I can edit the pod, drain it, and so forth. I can navigate to my deployments. We have a fantastic feature that we'll be talking about in a moment. But here, I think y'all all get the picture that this graphical user interface and the ability to truly understand all of the objects within your cluster and how they're performing follows Lens everywhere. I can go to my config maps, take a look at the namespaces that are associated. I can take a look at secrets. I don't have any in this cluster, horizontal pod autoscalers, vertical pod autoscalers, and so forth. Before continuing, I do want to show that if I open up a terminal session and I do kubectl version, I'm going to be able to see what that version is. And again, this is a K8s cluster, open source, lightweight Kubernetes distro that I have connected to Lens right now. And if I want to navigate to my EKS cluster, I actually have the opportunity to do so in just a moment. And then, of course, I can see the version as well here. And this is exactly what I mentioned earlier, which is the opportunity to manage and monitor multiple Kubernetes clusters while achieving full situational awareness. So I went from a local cluster to an EKS cluster in a matter of seconds. And again, we saw that the smart terminal is always connecting to the correct kubectl version, making sure that I'm working in the correct context. We're going to navigate back to my demo cluster. I can take a look at the network, the services. You actually have the opportunity to port forward directly into your applications as well. I'm not sure if this port is open. We'll see. And there you go. I believe you guys can see my screen. I just port forwarded directly into Prometheus from LDK or from Lens in the matter of seconds. Again, without writing any kubectl. Navigating back, I can see the cluster IP. I can see when it was created. I can see the ports that are associated, the endpoints. And of course, I can edit this service as well. Couple very cool things that Lens allows you to do as well, outside of just the full situational awareness, is you do have the opportunity to create resources directly in Lens. And what's neat about this is we provide templates for you. So if I want to create a deployment, I can create an Nginx deployment, create it and close it. It's going to create it. Deployment has successfully been created. And from here, I can navigate to my deployments. We can see that it was created 8 seconds ago. The condition is good. It's available. It's progressing. The namespace it's associated to is default. I can click into this and then again, immediately see all of the descriptions, details that you would like to see when taking a look at this deployment. A feature we haven't talked about yet is the vulnerability section. So here we can see that this particular deployment has some critical CVEs. I can immediately see what the severity is, the packages associated to, and click into that CVE, and it's going to port forward and tell me everything about this particular CVE. So that goes back to the troubleshooting, the debugging, that we talked about in the past, where anyone and everyone can very easily understand the overall state and health of their cluster. Navigating back to Lens, you have some other cool functionalities as well. I can scale these deployments, desired number of replicas, can scale this down to 1, and it's going to kill those pods, or it's going to terminate those pods. You also have the opportunity to navigate and filter by namespace. And as mentioned earlier, we're always respecting your role-based access control. So if you're a developer and only have access to the default namespace, you're only going to see the objects and the resources associated to that particular namespace. I'm the cluster admin for this, so obviously I can see every single thing within this. Again, we can scale this up too if we choose to do so. So I can navigate through my deployments, go to Nginx, hit the scale icon. Let's scale it up to 5. And then if we navigate to pods, we can see they're being created, pending, and now they're all running. Immediately allowing me to scale these deployments up or down. I'm going to scale this down so it doesn't hurt my cluster. Scale, navigate back to pods, and we can see they're being terminated, and they've been terminated now. So that's a quick high-level overview of all of the things you can do, or some of the things you can do in Lens from a full situational awareness and managing and monitoring clusters. You also have the ability to access Helm charts directly in Lens as well. You can click Argo CD and install this Helm chart directly into Lens if you choose to do so. And you'll have all of the details associated and needed to deploy this if you choose to do it manually. And if I click install, it's going to install this Helm chart directly into my cluster. From here, we can navigate to access control. This is a place where you can create additional cluster roles, cluster role bindings, and so forth easily. Click here and create the account name associated to a namespace. If I want to create some cluster roles, I can. Go to cluster role binding as well. Select what type of role I want to give somebody, right? So maybe cluster admin, can name it, bind it to a user account, and so forth. So we had the opportunity to touch on the Security Center just a bit. It is a new feature within Lens. If I go to the Security Center, I can get an overview of what is kind of happening in my cluster, all of the images that are associated, the vulnerabilities, the results of the scan, the resources, the roles that are, I need to install this operator, that's all right. And here, again, I can click into this and get a clear understanding of what is going on. Now, navigating back to my EKS cluster, I have the opportunity to do all of these things once again, right? Immediately understanding everything that is going on within my Kubernetes cluster. We do have some other very cool features that I can't necessarily present without a colleague, but I do want to talk about them. And they're not necessarily all about achieving full situational awareness for multiple clusters, but they are very unique functionalities. So one is on the top right-hand side, I have this toggle here that's called local. And when I click it, I get a whole bunch of different, I want to call them spaces, where I can click into these spaces, and it's going to bring me to a space that is actually shared with other individuals. So what's neat about this is you have the ability to share access to a Kubernetes cluster without ever exposing them to the kubeconfig file. That's done through an end-to-end encryption. We do install an agent on top of the cluster, and from there you can actually adjust and invite people to this space. That is, and here you can see everybody that has access to this space. You invite people to this space to allow them to access that Kubernetes cluster. Here, there's no clusters currently invited or added, but all of these folks, if I were to add a cluster to this, they can have specific functionality on that cluster and use the cluster itself. So navigating back to my local environment, go back to cluster, we can see how we're performing. We can see the CPU, the memory, we can see the spikes when I was increasing the deployments. We talked about creating resources. We took a look at the smart terminal, kubectl, get all A. And this is exactly why Lens is so powerful. In order to work with Kubernetes, you do need to understand kubectl. You need to kind of somewhat be proficient in kubectl. And What I just did is I wanted to see everything that's currently running all the objects that are currently running in my cluster. So I can see all the pods, I can see the services, the daemon sets, the deployments, the replica sets, and so forth. But I was able to do so very easily without writing any kubectl earlier. Earlier, we also had the opportunity to talk about real-time events. We didn't see any events because I didn't do anything to the cluster, but here we can see all of the events that have taken place and when they took place and what was affected. This is killing that container for Nginx when I deployed the Nginx deployment. So we can see exactly what happened, when it happened, the type, it's normal, that's good. We deleted a pod. So we're really achieving full situational awareness of everything that's happening in that Kubernetes cluster. I want to share a couple other awesome features that we have. One of those features is Lens extensions. Lens extensions is a place where you can actually build your own extension to add to Lens to increase the functionality behind Lens. So if I click available extensions here, this is going to take us to all of the extensions that are currently created by either Mirantis or our partner organizations, or really just the cloud native community. Starboard Aqua Security, we have Cube Cost built in, so you can see how much you're spending per namespace or for your clusters. You have Resource Map, which is actually a very cool extension. I don't have it installed as of right now, but it allows you to visualize how all of your Kubernetes resources and the objects are related to one another, from your networking to your storage and so forth. We have cool, and we're calling them experimental and fun demos, but we have some other things where you can sync GKE clusters directly through Google Cloud without actually having to add the kubeconfig file to your machine and then importing it into Lens. We have some games that we have, like Space Invaders. I suggest not adding this to a production grade environment, but you can kill pods via Space Invaders. It's actually super cool. Like you can shoot at them and kill them and so forth. So this is a fantastic feature of Lens that's really going to extend the functionality behind Lens for anyone and everyone. I believe there's over 1,000 extensions currently built, but many of them are private by the organizations that use Lens on a day-to-day basis. So we don't have access to those extensions. Navigating back to Lens, you can see I do have my GKE extensions synced. Don't have any GKE clusters as of right now, but I do have it synced if I were to use it. On the left-hand side here, this is where you would add all of the different clusters that you want to take a look at or that you want to access. So this is what we call the hotbar, and this is how we manage and monitor multiple Kubernetes clusters. I'm in my EKS cluster now. I'm in my K0s cluster that's running locally, and that's how you switch from cluster to cluster to achieve full situational awareness very, very easily. There's one last feature that I want to talk about, and this is the cluster that I've actually been working with to show this demo, which is LDK. LDK is Lens Desktop Kubernetes, which is a development environment that we provide our users with, allowing them to build Docker images directly in Lens as well. I'm not going to go into detail for that. That's a separate webinar that we can do, but it's a fantastic feature that allows anyone to easily access a Kubernetes cluster. Just install Lens, configure Lens Desktop Kubernetes. You can create a new profile. You can say how big the cluster you want, which Kubernetes version you want, the memory, the disk size, the CPU, and so forth. So this is Lens. You have the opportunity to achieve full situational awareness, view custom resources from Istio to Ingress. You can view all the namespaces that are associated to your cluster, click into them. You can edit these things. You can create namespaces as well. I can create a namespace easily and straightforward. I can view my services. We port forwarded it into Prometheus earlier. We can do it again. Port forward directly into Prometheus, navigate back. So the functionality within Lens is quite amazing. And again, it's reducing the complexity of Kubernetes through a graphical user interface, allowing you to manage and monitor multiple Kubernetes clusters, helping you achieve full situational awareness of everything that is happening within your Kubernetes cluster. I'm going to stop here and see if anybody has any questions regarding Lens or the presentation that we did. And in the meantime, what I can do is I will navigate over to k8slens.dev so folks can see what our website looks like, as well as give them the opportunity to see where they can download Lens Desktop. Lens Desktop is free, so you can download it. We do have a pro version with additional functionality and features like LDK, like that teamwork functionality I showed you, where you have the ability to share access to a Kubernetes cluster with your colleagues without ever exposing them to a kubeconfig file. And the use cases for that is endless. If I have a team of developers that need to access a specific namespace and I do not want to give them access to a kubeconfig file, I can share the cluster with them. I can adjust the role-based access control directly in Lens, and then they'll be able to view all of the objects within that namespace. Another use case is you have a team of support individuals that need to access the cluster to troubleshoot something, to debug something. You can share access with them immediately while having the opportunity to revoke access as well. Currently used by over 1 million users, as we talked about, more than 50,000 organizations, and over 500,000 clusters are added. Looks like there's no questions. So with that, I will wish each and every single one of you a fantastic rest of your day, wherever you are in the world. I very much appreciate you spending time with us today. Everyone's quite busy, so it's very, very much appreciated. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.